I'm Terrence McNally. Welcome to Freeform, a world that just might work. I'll be speaking today with Ike Wilson, retired U.S. Army colonel, former director of the U.S. Army War College Strategic Studies Institute, who once led the Commanders Initiatives Group at U.S. Central Command. He writes Compound Security Unlocked on Substack and hosts the Civic Brief podcast. On Freeform, we explore the lives, the work, the ideas of individuals that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at politics, economics, environment, science, health, culture, all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. The show streams weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn, and podcasts are available anytime, anywhere on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, most major podcast sites, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net. TERRENCEMCNALLY.net. For 14 springs, beginning in 2001, I participated as a panelist at the Conference on World Affairs on the campus of the University of Colorado in Boulder. Its founding, just after World War II, somehow involved Eleanor Roosevelt. I'm not sure of the whole story, but it's a pretty unique setup. 110 invited panelists pay their own way to stay in the homes of locals and speak on 8 to 12 panels on a wide range of subjects over the course of a week. It's actually some of the most grueling fun I've ever had. Many, like myself, returned year after year, and someday we might talk more about the whole phenomenon, but let me just say that I shared panels and parties with the likes of Molly Ivins, Roger Ebert, Rachel Maddow, and today's guest, Ike Wilson. Ike attended West Point, taught at West Point, spent an entire career in the U.S. Army. I led with the fact that we met at the CWA because I realized it was only because that conference brought together such an eclectic cast that I would ever cross paths with him. When Trump sent troops to LA, I started thinking about doing this particular show. The escalation since in DC, Chicago, and now Portland makes clear we need to take note of Trump's use and abuse of the military. I don't talk with or about the military much. I've done few, if any, episodes about the military since the height of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Seems like negligence when you consider its footprint in terms of people, money, power, and impact. I reached out to Ike to make up for some of that. It strikes me that in the military, when you're operating at a high level or you're dealing in strategy, both of which he did, if you hope to successfully engage in conflict, which to some extent is what the military is about, you must first successfully engage in cooperation on a massive scale, right? It's a tool for conflict, but it absolutely depends on cooperation. Isaiah Ike Wilson III, PhD, is a scholar and a soldier. As I said, retired U.S. Army colonel and strategist whose career spans command, classrooms, campaigns. He served as president of the Joint Special Operations University, director of the U.S. Army War College Strategic Studies Institute and Press, director of the Commanders Initiatives Group for the Commander U.S. Central Command, a former professor and academic program director at West Point. He founded the West Point Grand Strategy Program and has taught at Columbia, Yale, George Washington, Arizona State University, and the National War College. His honors include the Defense Superior Service Medal and the Bronze Star. His books include Thinking Beyond War, Letters to the Republic, and Blueprints from the Ashes. He writes, as I said, the Substack Compound Security Unlocked and hosts the Civic Brief, a podcast for civic leaders on most major podcast sites. Welcome, Ike Wilson, to Freeform, a world that just might work.
Terrence, thanks so much. I cannot tell you how excited I am to have this conversation. I frankly hope I now live up to the marketing. What a phenomenal opener. And like I said, I just hope I do you good service and the listeners good service. I consider this and these kinds of activities, as you know, Terrence, from our days at CWA, this is a public service. You know, this is a duty When I was wearing the cloth of the nation as a military officer, licensed to practice, 33 years of my professional service life. I never turned down these kind of opportunities because I serve the public. So these opportunities are a duty. I remain a soldier for life as we as retirees are considered in the United States Army. It's similar to once a Marine, always a Marine in our brethren community, the United States Marine Corps. And so I revisit my oath that I swore first time on the plane back in 1984,
Wow.
long, long time ago, on my reception day, first day I arrived at West Point, going into what we called Beast Barracks, our basic training. And every year since, and continued since my retirement in 2017, I revisit that oath.
Question. It's not to the Constitution, or it is to the Constitution and directly
Yes,
to us?
sir. It is to the Constitution. The Constitution is first and foremost an idea. We part of our unique exceptionalism in the positive sense of American exceptionalism and the word exceptional is that we have a constitution where we swear an oath in the military to protect and defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That is to an idea, and that idea is in the embodiment of we the people, that general welfare, provide for the common defense, protect the general welfare, all in the preamble. That preamble can become and should become the measuring stick against all activities, ideas, actions, and investments of our country in any given moment, at every given moment. And that's our report card. How well we prove green, amber, or red on those measures, captured eloquently in the preamble.
The preamble,
Hmm.
to me, is what we really need to live up to, because the original document had its
Yes,
flaws because of the
absolutely,
compromises that had to be made. But the
absolutely.
preamble is kind of the stake in the ground.
It absolutely is. It is the long pole in the tent from a military standpoint. It is the cornerstone. You don't get that long pole in the tent stable and upright. You have a faulty tent, and you may not have. You may be crushed underneath the canvas. Right. That's an interesting metaphor as we go into this conversation to determine today, how firm and upright our long pole in our American tent is. A
Right.
large
And what
part
I
of that stabilization is the American civil military relationship. And it's vitally important that the people of the United States of America, citizens all, understand their military, your military. And I revisited it again today, my commissioned oath, word by word. Nowhere in there does it require me to swear an oath to the United States Army. I'm obligated to follow the legal orders of officers above me, but I'm not, nowhere is it expressly and explicitly stated that I swear an oath to any particular institution. I'm obligated to abide by the President of the United States and particularly under conditions where the President dons and leads through the hat of Commander in Chief, one of several hats. But that does not mean that I'm only obligated and only swearing a loyalty oath to the executive branch, to the office of the president, or to any particular individual in that seat at any given time, to include the current occupant. Right? The war power, the military power is a shared power, like all powers in the United States in the Constitution. It's a shared power through separate institutions. And that's part of our intended check and balance against the unwarranted and unbridled acquisition of power. Our founders and framers were scared to death, and that is not an exaggeration, of unregulated, unbridled accumulations of unwarranted power vested in single entities, to include, and I know we're going to get to this, Terrence, to include fear of that power being vested in a mob
right,
populace.
right, right.
Right?
They were both afraid of kings, or
Yes.
protecting the country from kings, but they were also, since it was such a new phenomenon, they
That's
were
right.
also afraid of the majority. And
That's
and
right.
and their original constitution, and I say original because I
Yeah.
do believe their their sense was, and my guess is especially as the summer wore on in Philadelphia,
You bet.
and they started sort of rushing to, what compromise can we get this thing done?
Yeah.
Their sense was that they would not be the last generation of revolutionaries.
Jefferson said it himself. Now, Jefferson was in Paris, but whispering in the ear of his protege, James Madison, who was the major architect of that transition from the Articles of Confederation that governed us through the war years of the Revolution, 11 years of governance under the Articles, a very loose, I think, small c constitution, a very loose social compact, very limited power, if much at all, in a central government.
You're talking about the Articles of Confederation.
Talking
Yeah.
about the Articles of
Yeah.
Confederation. Preponderance of power rested within the small r republics that were the 13
States.
once colonies, now these states, united, but loosely united. There were problems with that. They went back to the Constitutional Convention in order to, first and foremost, update the Articles of Confederation. Madison came in with, as all good leaders, and proud of him in the military, rich military planner tradition as well. You go in ready to plan ecumenically with a group. You also go in with a hip pocket draft. Madison went in with a draft, influenced indirectly through letters from his mentor, Thomas Jefferson, who was the plenipotentiary, the ambassador to Paris at the time and in Paris during the convention. And lo and behold, we know the rest of the story. They came out not with just an update, a facelift to the Articles, but a full new document and a revolutionary document, certainly for the United States of America. But we are the first nation state of the world system. We changed everything. We are the first change in the relationship between governed and governors, moving from a dynastic age of kings and monarchs, still have monarchies even today, but we gave birth, in our birth as a nation, a new form of nation statehood. And the nation state is very important to understand what it represents. State is suffix. Nation is prefix. Nation first. The state gathers its only legitimacy in how it serves the nation, we the people. We have lots of state nations that exist today that are different. Putin's Russia, Xi's China are state nations where the people are secondary. They serve and are at the service of the state. A big question today is how much is America today still a nation state transitioning through market state, which a lot of people talk about. I do as well in my writings. We can talk a little bit about that. That might be a whole nother topic for another podcast. But how much are we still a nation state, or how much have we drifted? I'll be kind and say drifted towards more of an authoritarian state nationhood. That's a very dangerous thing. We're living through the dangers right now.
I never thought of the nation meaning the people, actually. Mm-hmm. But of course it does. And it is that relationship between nation and state. And by the way, one I think we described China as at this point as practicing state capitalism.
That's right. Statism.
Right? It's no longer it's state capitalism. Absolutely. And what's happening is that basically the U.S. moving from the other side is coming very close to the same thing.
Yes. And whether it's witting or unwitting, there is a conjoining. The two ships passing in the night, different regime types, but we're drifting together.
They become more capitalist. We became more authoritarian. And when you start taking a piece of NVIDIA and a piece of these corporations,
that's right.
They look very identical. We are recording this Wednesday, October 8th. I like people to get a feel for the people. I like listeners to get a feel for the people behind the ideas and the work and the projects and so on. So briefly, in your own words, your path to the work you do today.
Wow.
And you can go way back, childhood inspiration, turning points, mentors, that sort of thing. And this is a chunk of the conversation.
Yeah, this is I'll admit to you and the listeners right now, I've been sweating this question. I've been sweating it. This is always the hardest question for me. And you're going to have to give me the hook, Terrence. I grew up with parents, my father, career military, 30 years active military, and then the day after he retired, he put the cloth of the nation down, and went right back to work as a civilian executive for another 12 years until his untimely death in 1985. So 42 years of service for him. My mother right there with him. Unfortunately, I can't calculate the service that we did during our slave years, frankly. Let's just be honest about it. As a Black American, right, in the service to nation, even prior to the nation during our colonial predicate. But by my best count, well over 150 years of uniform service to the nation. It's really the family. I hate to even use the word, but I will. It's the family business. Was, and am proudly a military brat. I grew up on military bases. My sister, 15 years older than me. My parents started over again at her urging. They thought that they were done with kids. My dad was at the 20-year mark of his career, about to retire, and they were thinking about adopting. And my sister prodded them to, try again. And I popped up, and then my dad decided, well, not time to retire yet.
Another mouth to feed.
Another mouth to feed. But strong tradition of military in our family. We hail from as far as back as we can record it, given our heritage.
Yeah.
Right. So I
But
consider myself, as the nation receives me, as a Black American. I'm many things. I found out
yeah,
through DNA testing. I'm 20% Irish. So that notion of the joking notion of the Black Irish. Hey, I'm here to say it's funny, but it's real too.
right.
I'm Black Irish. I have my Wilson tartan. Of course, that's not my family's cultural name, but it's with us long enough.
One thing that ends up showing, like your Irish heritage, is
Yeah.
very often, although it may not be in your case, many people are descended both from slaves and slave owners.
Well, and Terrence, to complicate it even further, my family homestead is the bayous of Louisiana, so we're Creole.
Oh,
So a few years back, I was interviewing for a executive assistance job with the National Security Council, and I was speaking with Steve Hadley. We had a great conversation. The answer I gave to the question of "Tell me about your background" is probably what helped me not get the job. I was number two, as they were kind enough to tell me, and I said, my background is, we all came over on boats. Half of my, portion of my family came over as ticketed passengers, and the others were probably in some respects on the same boats underneath in chains. And we go to Louisiana and we all are interblended, right? I mean, that's just the nature of Cajuns and Creoles down Louisiana. We understand it down there. It makes perfect sense to us.
yeah, right.
Right along with the Napoleonic Code that still governs things in the state of Louisiana, right? But it's hard. It's one of those hard, exceptional things that the rest of the country can't really get its mind and arms around.
Do you know if any of your ancestors served in the Union Army?
That's the challenge. I would be surprised not, because the tradition had to have started somewhere in it just didn't flip on like a light switch. We're servants to nation. I come from a family of servants to nation. Dad went to World War II, age of 16, so he obviously lied about the entry age. I'll admit this. Sorry, Dad. He first went for the Navy, but he had flat feet, so he couldn't. The Navy didn't take him, so he went to the Army, and served in both theaters of World War II, Korea, and two tours of duty in Vietnam. My parents reside in Arlington, in one of the most hallowed portions of Arlington. When we laid my dad to rest, the folks there even asked, "How are you all in this portion of the cemetery?" And it's because my dad's served long service in all those wars going back to World War II. Sister, Navy during the Vietnam period, married a Marine, 25, 30-year Marine veteran as well. My niece and nephew, both Army veterans. My nephew, a wounded warrior from Gulf War One. Yeah, it's just in our bodies and souls. And equal to the uniform service, each way along the way, we put down the cloth and we end up in some capacity back in public service, or some kind of public service capacity to the nation. So,
So,
like I
so
said, it's a family business.
one last thing, and then we're going to move into the questions about the military
That's great.
writ
Yeah.
large. You served both in combat and behind a desk. Talk just a
Yes.
little bit about that.
Yeah. So graduated from West Point in 1989. I was commissioned second lieutenant, like all of us were, and then I went into combat arms as an Army aviator. So first 10, 11 years of my career, uh, Apache helicopter pilot. I commanded at the company grade level in Europe, Apache troop. That led into my baptism of fire in the Balkans crises of 1990s to early 2000s. My first combat or imminent danger experience. For those of us old enough to remember the old Raiders of the Lost Ark, I had a very peculiar, I'm proud of it. It just kind of fell upon me, kind of an Indiana Jones military career. 33 years, I hopscotched between field assignments, teaching assignments. And so, like Indiana Jones, he was a professor. But when he wasn't a professor, he was out doing quote unquote archaeological work. I never left the fielded force, but I taught in every professional military education school from lieutenant all the way up through full colonel. Every school I had to go to as a student, I also taught because I had the fortune of getting master's degrees and PhDs very early and very young in my career. The Army sent me there, invested in that work. So by 2013, I was at the 11-year mark of being a extended duty professor, a program director at West Point of American Politics, Policy, and the Strategy program. I was up for a sabbatical, and I was looking to go out to the field for a year, possibly, and so an operational sabbatical. I got a call at the time. Our former Secretary of Defense, Secretary Lloyd Austin, was the four-star general just nominated to take over as commander of United States Central Command. 21 countries ranging from the Caspians all the way down to the Levant and Egypt, all of the greater Middle East in the Caspian region, his responsibility as a geographic commander. And he was pulling a team together, a small group of extended hard drive for his own thinking, his advisor group. Even to this day, if a four-star general asks, that's a mission requirement. And we came to the understanding that he was not satisfied with just a temporary few months assignment, that he wanted me there for his whole tenure. So
Interesting.
I think I'm still the only academy professor ever to turn back, do the crazy thing of turning back what can be a very comfortable, no bullets firing over your head or at you assignment. Turn the professorship back in 2013. Headed down to Tampa, Florida, CENTCOM, and came back to the force. And we were off to the races for a whole other career, counter ISIS campaigns, everything, Yemen, Afghanistan, Iraq 3.0, everything. But that's really kind of the story of my background. Very peculiar military career. I'll be honest with you. I don't know if I would have stayed in service in the cloth if I was not able to have that unique opportunity to bring field ops back to the classroom to grow the next generation educationally and through training and inspiration, and also then to bring that education piece, the purpose of why you have a military, back out to the field.
Let me just tell people this is Freeform, a world of just my work. I'm Terrence McNally. I'm speaking with Ike Wilson, retired Army colonel, former director of the U.S. Army War College Strategic Studies Institute, once led the Commanders Initiatives Group at U.S. Central Command. We just spoke of that. And he writes Compound Security Unlocked on Substack and hosts the Civic Brief as a podcast. I think we've got to talk about the reason that I reached out to you this time, which is Trump's use and abuse of the military. As I had written this question, I assume I know the answer already, but as I had written it, it was, your overall impression, is this the crisis I fear it to be? And then sort of what's normal, what's legal, what are the costs of the abuse, and any sense of where we're headed or how this plays out.
Terrence, I'm going to try to give you a concise answer. It's difficult for me. I'm with the gift of gab, right? And then maybe we can dive deeper into a portion of it to flesh things out. There's one particular aspect of it I'd like to talk
highlight.
To highlight. But the short answer, you asked if it's serious, if it's that moment of crisis that we fear. I'll tell you personally and professionally, it's something that I've thought about from the beginning of my uniformed service career. You can talk to my children. I mean, I probably owe them an apology But I remember having conversations, regular conversations with them about how fragile and tentative, and here's the word, conditional, how conditional the solvency and the stability of our American Democratic Republic, small d, small r, how contingent that is and how conditional. We're a blended family here in my household. We have Americans and Canadians. My wife's a Torontonian. Um, but we're a Black American family. Even my quote unquote white kids, because they grow up in a Black household in America, they carry some of that conditionality. I grew up as a young man, as a kid, understanding just from watching my parents that the country we love, the country we've served, bled for, died for, is the same country that from time to time over that history has not really loved us. We love the country, but and particularly at times when the country doesn't love us, right? And that's part of the service. That's really kind of part of my core faith in the Bible that guides me. Are we serious? You know, when you are a conditional American, a part of the marginalized groups, you kind of have a a prey sensibility. That's where my healthy skepticism comes in, right? I'm not part of the majority class. I don't benefit from the majority's predator's comfort.
Hmm.
Someone who's never been hunted, right? That's very important for our country and its stability, in its empathy, in its legitimacy, to hear not only from the strength of our nation that comes from the majority, but also to hear from the minority voices because it keeps us honest. Predator and prey. Yes, it is the moment. This is the moment. We are not drifting into authoritarianism. We're squarely in it within the stages and the steps of the escalation or de-escalation of leaving a democracy and moving into autocracy, right? What are lots of red lines? The red line is politicizing all of the forces, and we're talking about the military today, but a politicization, a very particular type of politicization, a partisan politicization of the force, hyper partisanship to the point of not just tribalism, but blood vendetta tribalism. That's where our nation is today. Today, the public loyalty tests, theatrical assemblies of senior officers that we just had recently at Quantico, partisan labeling push, all that pushes us towards that line. And frankly, we're beyond the red line. I would still say we're not past the point of no return,
Right.
right? But the margin of error, that margin of error is incredibly thin. Now, you asked what's normal, what's legal, costs, where might this go? Just a couple of tidbits here, just to kind of prompt some things. What's normal in your military in terms of the chain of command? The normal precedent is the president as commander in chief, the secretary of defense, subordination of military to civilian authority, right? Reserving the right for the civilian authority to be wrong. That's the premise. That's the foundation of American civil military relations. It's a healthy thing, but it can also be warped and manipulated to become a very dangerous thing. But normal, president, SecDef, you have then two lines: man, train, equip, the service providers to your military that grow readiness of the force, provide the tanks, the aircraft, the people, et cetera, et cetera. Those are run by the service chiefs, right? And they are subordinate to a civilian authority called the secretary. And so each of the services has a secretary. That secondary parallel line are those who are in charge of employment of that man trained and equipped force. And those are the combatant commanders. We divide the world into 11 combatant commands, right? Because we are the super force of the world system, right? Seven of those 11 are geographic commanders. They're in charge of a portion of the earth, right? And everything that happens, good, bad, and ugly within it. Kind of geographic governorships, military governorships. And then you have another four that are functional, that cover the globe, like things like United States Transportation Command. In my last command that I served and advised the four-star general commander as the education executive, United States Special Operations Command, a global RIT, right? Here's another part of what's normal. Orders are written and they're constitutional consistent, right? Candid advice, speak that whole notion of speaking truth with candor to power, bedrock, right? In a norm that is sacred. I'm using that word very
And
intentionally.
you said that quickly. Let me just make sure I know what you're saying.
Yes,
You're saying that um, it is not a luxury. It is an absolute necessity and responsibility
yes,
of the military to speak truth to the civilian
absolutely.
authorities who are leading it.
Absolutely, because your military services are professions, and what defines and distinguishes a profession from a regular organization or a bureaucracy, a bureaucratic agency? Profession is distinguished on three broad tenets: uh, a unique, peculiar expert knowledge and expertise, unique and peculiar established responsibility to something higher than self, in what we call a unique and peculiar sense of corporateness, right? Within the body itself, an ethic, an organization of individuals governed as much by the norms of an ethic and ethos as much as it is governed and regulated by laws and statutes. In fact, if you look at the laws governing the behavior and the decision processes of your military, it's a pretty short list of legal statutes. What governs us and keeps us subordinate is the health of that normative ethic and ethos that begins and ends with subordination of the military to civilian authority, even when the civilian authority is wrong in their
So,
judgments. So the advice givings to make sure that they are not wrong in the decisions they're making, particular over a unique and peculiar expertise in the employment of force, in the building of that force to employ, you need a very unique and peculiar body of experts, educated, trained in field, forged through, in particularly in combat and through combat experience, who knows how to employ force, that warrior lethality that everyone's talking about today in faux terms. But to make sure that the warrior lethality, that America's military can fight and win America's wars, but to do so in a manner that is consistent with who America is, the soul of America, the norms and values of America. What we never want to happen is that we win because we bring more preponderance of force against an adversary and a challenger and an enemy. Yeah, we win the battle, but we lose our souls in the process of the manner in which we did so. We're no longer a democracy at the end of the fight. It's not worth the fight then.
right, right.
So that's
Or we commit war crimes
all
while
of that
in,
is
yeah,
embodied in
right,
what I
right.
just laid out.
So
Absolutely.
so you've just talked about what's normal, and that
Yes.
the one that really kind of made my my ears
Hair
stick
stand
up,
on the back of your neck.
right, was even when they're wrong. What is going on in terms of that right now? It looks to me like
Mhm.
if you are sending troops into American cities on
Yes.
false premises,
Yes.
and clearly false premises, right?
Yes.
The
Yep.
video doesn't lie
Yep.
unless it's 5 years old. Um, then it seems to me that is already wrong. How do you think this is going on, and what should we be looking for in terms of the how the military is relating to these orders to, if not enforce a certain policy in the cities, intimidate and provoke?
That's right. So one of the best things about our American civil military relationship over the years and decades, 2 centuries and a half, is that subordination of the military to civilian authority. Even to the point of civilian authority reserving the right to be wrong. Now, let's unpack wrong, right? Um, Something can be legally right in terms of the law, but moral and ethically, or even in the spirit of the law, abjectly wrong. It's what I refer to as lawful but awful orders. And we're learning our American civil military relationships of the American Democratic Republic are, to say the least, being stress tests, right? And in many places, in many ways, we are failing the stress test. We're breaking at the weak points, at the ambiguous points. And one of these you've hit on right now, Terrence. And the uncomfortable moment is we know from an awful aspect of what's happening here with the federalization of guard troops with no request from the governors, and the mayors, important point to make, it's by executive fiat, right? Federalization of American cities. I do believe it's all about intimidation. I want to get back to some of the things that Senator Chris Murphy said on the Senate floor the other day. He laid out a 5-point, he calls it the plan. I have a Substack that I wrote up earlier
Yeah,
today that compares that against the classic political scientists and comparative politics experts' articulation of the 5 stages of drift into authoritarianism, and they marry well. So
of course.
that's the bigger context. The problem we have here with these deployments, first to DC, it's easier to get away with it within legal bounds, rough, fuzzy legal
Well,
bounds.
wait, you said first to DC. You're
Is
not saying chronologically, you're saying that DC has different rules.
DC has different rules because DC is not a state. And one of the part of the reasons why, in hindsight, always being better in 2020, wow, we should have probably listened to no taxation without representation. That is on all the license plates of people who live in the District of Columbia. There's nothing that the mayor could do because DC is not a state to stand up. Now it's a different story when you're talking about Los Angeles, in California, and when you're talking about Chicago and Illinois, right? And we're seeing the pushback, but you're seeing an executive that has, and is on all fronts executing his power, driven by a unitary executive theory that is now in practice and action, right?
Right. And let me just step in for a second just to flesh that one out for folks a little bit. This unitary executive, the answer to which is no kings, this unitary executive is a distortion
Correct.
of the system of checks and balances, the system of conditionality and shared governance, which IKE has talked about. And it has been around probably forever. You know, I often say, by the way, that that if this were happening in the 1700s, that those red hats would say, "Make the colonies great again."
Oh yeah.
that
Oh, absolutely right.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But that the notion of this unitary executive, where we have an executive that has more power than the courts or the Congress or the people, has finally won the Republican Party and then won the presidency. And whether it's Russell Vought, lead author of Project 2025, who is now running the Office of Management and Budget, Trump has actually said Russell's in charge of where we're making the cuts. Originally it was Musk, now it's Vought. So you got him. He's always been a unitary executive guy. That's what Project 2025 is about. It turns out so has John Roberts, the head of the Supreme Court. Yes. And when your check on the unchecked power of the executive is the Supreme Court, but you've got sitting at the top and with 5 allies, folks who actually favor this not all powerful, but most powerful executive. That's what we're talking about.
The verdict's still not completely in on whether the Supreme Court will judge most powerful or all powerful. Our founders and framers didn't imagine this moment, right? They didn't. There was a lot of power left on the table, but you can read the statutes, you can read the articles in the sections of our Constitution that speak to the obligation of the executive to well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office of the presidency. But there's a lot to be regulated by the established norms of the day of the type of person and personality that would come into that job. They did not see a need at their time and their moment in the dominant norms and culture of them and theirs as requiring what Madison always warned everyone about. Men are not angels, therefore we need government, and always the need for auxiliary precautions. We are learning in a deadly way to our democracy today that we don't have enough auxiliary precautions on the ability for an executive through executive fiat and constitutional capture to take all that extra power left on the table and and pull it into themselves and to set precedent by action. And that's what we're seeing in DC, in Los Angeles, and in Chicago and other places to come. It is the executive ex expanding his power through action, and there's a business lag to the other institutions. Well, there's a Congress that has committed legicide, right? Legislative suicide,
Yep.
right? And we can get into the details if you prompt me to talk about the parties. One no longer a party, really. We've lost the GOP. It's become more of an apocalyptic cult. The Democrats, as a party, fractured and still trying to figure out what happened during the last election instead of trying to unify and figure out how to get in front of this executive hyper tribal energy and get back in front of this movement in
Let me
order
say
to
something
check
that
and
is
balance.
not. Let me say something which is not going to defend the Democratic Party as such. I think the only Democrat you've mentioned in this conversation was Chris Murphy.
So far, yeah.
Chris Murphy is doing his job.
I think so too.
Gavin Newsom, J.B.
Yep.
Pritzker,
Yep.
AOC, Bernie
Yes.
Sanders.
Yes.
There are people doing their job.
Yes.
The problem is that
we're not getting the multiplier effect.
That's right. That's right. That the full force of the fact that Trump and his policies are so unpopular is not reflected in a unitary response. That's the lag we're in right now.
That's exactly right. And it's also a action on the part of the executive and the MAGA Republican movement behind it, and the Democrats and the small p progressive movement, the rest of us on the other side, in my not so humble opinion, still too much in a reaction.
Yes.
We're reacting to illiberal actions, but it's a defensive posture. And as the great Clausewitz says, getting us back to the military focus, the defense is the strongest form of war, but it has a negative object, right? The defense that we talk about in the military is a defensive position that is a shield capable of delivering multiple blows. You've got to have an action plan. So yes, defend, call out fake news, call out misinformation and disinformation, call out illiberal practices and investments from rhetoric to action, but also unify around your own plan that is small d, small l, small d, small r, liberal, democratic, republicanism, and getting us back on that path towards a more perfect union. There's got to be a positive aim. And what I see lacking right now, I see a lot of great effort from the people that you just mentioned, particularly from the governors, on coming up slow but steady in defending, putting up firewalls. But you gotta reorganize and consolidate on the objective once you're under attack. You got to prepare for counterattacks. You got to prepare your own action plan, right? That's the missing piece right now. Once an action plan is laid out, I think there's great promise and probability. I place a lot of hope in it as well as a citizen that you'll see a rationalization of a lot of the many, not one, your actions that are necessary actions, but they're not adding up to a sufficiency level. Terrence, let me just directly say what the problem is here from a civil military relationship with these deployments. You're already hearing and seeing from your military that which we would expect or should expect from them based on what I've already described in the traditions and the bedrock foundations of American civil military relations. That your military at the end of the day is going to always follow legal orders. The problem is the orders that are being conveyed now that are bringing them into places like DC and Chicago and Los Angeles, some of them are legal. Most of them are questionable in legality, but you have to go through the court system. And there's a business lag to our court adjudication of executive actions. And that's what this president and the administration are using. They're manipulating and taking advantage. And that's why I would call it illiberal democratic actions. They are doing things, saying that they have the right to because they have the force available to, and the courts or the Congress don't have an army to stop them, right? And then we go through our normal process, rightfully so, but there's a lag. So you could see weeks, months, a year before the case rises to the level of Supreme Court adjudication
And then
that
this,
could and will likely say that action was illegal. We saw it in LA, but the
but,
action's already been committed.
but
And you've
the
already
other piece
softened,
that
you've already softened liberal democracy in those areas.
the people who listen to the show on a regular basis know that the key piece in that that is making things worse every time it happens is that a lower court actually questions the constitutionality
Yes,
of a Trump administration action, where they question whether it is unconstitutional.
correct.
And then we know, as you just pointed out, it can take months before it ever rises to the Supreme Court. And what the
That's
Supreme Court has done repeatedly, at one point 15 in a row,
yes,
is without explanation,
yes,
in the shadow docket,
yep,
allow the action which has been deemed unconstitutional by a lower court to move forward until the final decision is made,
correct.
rather than saying, since a lower court has deemed this unconstitutional, we're going to stay with the status quo until we rule on that. John Roberts and his 5 associates on his side, they believe way too much in this unitary executive, and
Correct.
they are in decision after decision allowing the destruction of the
Yes.
government,
Yep.
the destruction of the system to go forward, rather than saying, let's wait till we decide on its constitutionality.
That's right. You're hearing it from a Stephen Miller that you pay attention to the turns of phrase in the language that are now being used now, particularly in the context of Chicago, Illinois, and Portland, Oregon. Miller and others, but led by Miller's rhetoric, it is defining judges, those lower court just judges, as domestic insurrectionists, right? It's labeling of non-compliant mayors and governors as the enemy within. And you're hearing from the president now, several days straight. I think this is starting to look like insurrection. I think these are insurrectionists. You had the president call out for the arrest of Governor Pritzker and the mayor of Chicago, Illinois, this morning, late last night or this morning. This is all pretext. We are frogs slow boiling in that pot of hot water, and that's part of the sinister aspect of this plan. Chris Murphy laid out, and I encourage everyone, October 7, 2025, on the Senate floor. You can watch the YouTube. It's 17 minutes long, but he lays out the administration's plan. 5 points: convert justice into a political witch hunt, eliminate the free press, replace with a state media or a state influenced media, militarize law enforcement, seize control of spending and taxation, give grants and excuses and benefits for your oligarchic cronies, and get out of jail free cards for them for the quid pro quo of compliance, right? And rig the rules. How does that measure up to the classic steps of authoritarian escalation or de-escalation ladder? Number 1, neutralize the referees. Courts, prosecutors, media, inspectors general, judge advocate generals in the military, equal opportunity offices, IG, pipelines, oversight committees. Think about the shock and awe of the first 100 days of the administration and all the places where the attacks were going. The military was right up there in one of the top 3 of focus points for the attacks. Interestingly enough, it was the military's professional military education systems that were at the tip of the attacks on the military, eliminating faculty for DEI, going in and erasing curriculum, erasing bios of faculty, firing and cashiering faculty and staff, the digital book burnings.
And just so people know, the other instant attack was on the inspectors general and JAG officers and so
Correct.
on, that
Gone.
anybody that dealt with
Eliminated.
ethics, anybody that dealt
Eliminated.
with ethics was gone.
And to include the Quantico convocation a couple of weeks ago, who were not in the rooms were those adjutant generals. They were not in the room. The ones
They
that
were
we
not.
have,
Everyone else was told you got to be
everyone,
there. They were not in there.
they were not there. So first, neutralize the referees, monopolize the narrative, right? There's your press. Shift the instruments of coercion inward. Now it's the enemy within. The second part, the president's portion of the Quantico convocation, incredibly dangerous. People need to go back and watch it because he flipped the script and reoriented our national security and defense and military strategies from a top focus on enemies from without, external enemies, foreign, into a number one priority, protect the homeland against enemies within. His political enemies, and as he defines, and you'll see increasing, I predict, the loose configuration of what they call Antifa, anti-fascist, which is not an organization because it's not part of the core of anarchist movements, but that's going to be the label. That's going to be the catch-all. It's going to be the net that captures all fish. Anyone from doing regular, legal, benign protest. If it's against the administration, they're going to label Antifa, and they're going to roll you up as a domestic insurgent, or worse, a domestic terrorist. Capture the purse, which has been done. Typically, Wall Street ebbs and flows with Main Street to a large degree. Not totally, but to a large degree. Go back and study the charts, and by July of this past summer, all of a sudden you see the markets really not moving to any of the ebb and flow with the tariffs up, back and forth. My theory is the president has succeeded by that time of recalibrating the market in the big seven tech firms that really define the majority stake of the market itself. All those people that were standing behind him at the inauguration, they are now pegged to him.
Yes,
so
and you
is
take,
no longer pegged to the Main Street.
You take those seven out of the stock market,
absolutely,
and it's flat or down.
Correct.
It's all in those seven who were, as you say, sitting behind him at the inauguration and have found one way after another to appease and gratify and pander.
It's all about appeasement. So number 5, rewrite the rules. We're in the company of rogues.
Yeah.
Consistent with classic studies in historical cases of the demise and the fall of democracies into imperium and into autarky and authoritarianism, right? That's where we are. Your military, I get calls every day. I spent most of my day yesterday on different listservs because people are starting to wake up now. And they're starting to ask the question what they're seeing, that apartment building that was dragnetted, young kids and families in the dead of night, zip tied together, daisy chained together. Terrence, that looks just like the early days of your military in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? It looks just the same. And frankly, it's more the same than not. One of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing now and continuing the service out of uniform, I just wear a different uniform, but it's the same oath, is because I come back from 25, 30 years of over there fighting these tendencies of authoritarianism and liberalism. And I come back home and you talk to veterans, you get them in a quiet place, they'll be honest with you. I have a feel for these things. It's in my bones after all those years.
Yeah.
And our American streets smack of the same. We are on a dangerous de-escalation ladder into the very thing that we're supposed to be about, checking in all the over there places, and it's right here at home. The military, last point I want to make. A lot of the calls are basically boiled down to, when is the military going to stand up and check this abuse of power? And the unfortunate answer is, don't wait for that, because your military are going to follow legal orders. As a collective, the services are going to be on the wrong side of the business lag of authoritarian drift, right?
Because in other words, until it is clearly declared illegal, they will follow
by a legitimate authorized agent, which is the Congress and the court. the answers of illegality will come formally too late after the bad actions have happened. And so I have young officers who ask me, sir, I'm very concerned with when it comes to the point, not if, but when it comes to the point where I'm going to be asked to follow an illegal order. And I said, friend, that's what my generation dealt with during the Bush years and the issues on how we went to war of choice in Iraq and went anemically into a war and stayed too long in a place called Afghanistan. I've just teed that up in the way I did, Terrence, to get you to invite me back to talk about those wars in another session. The problem that our young officers have today, and our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen even, as we expand warfare to the coast with narco-terrorism and the blowing up of boats without legal adjudication and transparency of whether or not those are fishing boats or whether they are in fact true to form narco ships.
And by the way, even if they are, we don't have the right to summarily execute them.
Correct. This gray zoning, this graying of everything. The problem that our forces face today is not so much whether or not the answer should be easy. If it's a clear illegal order, you don't follow it. The problem is the orders are already and are going to be just awful, totally awful, but just legal enough to fall below the threshold of standing up.
Being legal enough doesn't mean they'll ultimately be found legal. It just means they haven't been found illegal yet.
Terrence, this is why I've never believed in common sense, because I've never seen it. There's nothing common about sense, and sense is relative. But that's the other watchword today: warrior lethality and common sense, right? I never believed in common sense. I believe in it less now. It's a veil, and it's a dangerous veil that's part of that broad net that's being put around all of us. We all know that what's happening now is at a minimum pushing the limits of what's legal and illegal. We know most of what's happening is illegal.
That's right.
But your military is not going to, as a collective, they're obedient to legal orders and that being determined by the courts in the Congress, right?
Yeah.
So that's unfortunately where we are. It's not about Americans cannot wait for the military to ride on horses and save us and our democracy. We, the people, must save our institutions, to include the military.
Very good. We're gonna have to stop there. We will do more because
wonderful.
We still have, because I want to learn more for myself and our listeners about the military.
Yeah.
And because I want to go more into the frame you're taking now, which is
wonderful.
Your take on civic discourse. So again, the books, which we didn't even get to, are Ike's written a couple of books in the last few years. Letters to the Republic, which is kind of how to kind of look at history for what's happening, and then Blueprints from the Ashes, which is what we can create once we stop what's happening. The Substack is Compound Security Unlocked, and the podcast is the Civic Brief. For this conversation and many other interviews and articles, to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY.net, or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same website. If you want to receive my weekly email announcement telling you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and usually 10 to 15 links to articles to flesh out that conversation, email me at TEMcNally, TEMCNALLY, TEMcNally@mac.com. You can also subscribe and listen to the Freeform podcast at Apple Podcasts, most major podcast sites, Spotify, etc. You'll find years of podcasts at those sites and at my site. I mean, hundreds. The archive is huge. I've been doing this for 25 years. You can also follow me on Twitter at McNally Terrence. Thanks to Kiana Williams in production, George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices, and most of all, you, my listeners. Please share this podcast widely. And finally, thank you, Ike Wilson, and keep up your good work.
Terrence, thanks for your service. Thanks to your listeners as well.